So the historic Russia-China meeting is here, and I like to pay attention to this because every time Putin and Xi they get together, something big tends to happen a few months later. And let's recall what happened the last time these two people met. They talk about driving changes not seen for 100 years, which led to a groundbreaking BRICS expansion. But what's interesting is that this meeting is on the backdrop of the Middle East conflict today. And this summit obviously is about China's Belt Road Initiative, the BRI, but there's going to be a lot of diplomatic moves this week, and it's not just about economic strategy being discussed here. So Lavrov met with Wang Yi ahead of Putin's arrival, and the first thing on their agenda is the Middle East crisis, which is very interesting. China is using this opportunity to call for peace, for ceasefire in the region. But if we dive into the remarks, it shows that Beijing and Moscow wants to play a bigger role in global affairs. And here's what Wang Yi said: the United Nations Security Council must take action, and the major powers should play an active role. And it's kind of obvious what he's alluding to and what he's hinting about, that China and Russia might roll out their own version of a peace plan when the time comes. So don't be surprised if halfway through the conflict, China might come in and help facilitate the negotiations. It is in their interest for peace in the Middle East. China's buying a ton of oil across the Gulf from Saudi Arabia to the UAE. In fact, Beijing has tripled their imports of Iranian oil over the last 2 years. We are talking about 87 of Iran's oil exports flowing exclusively to China. So peace in the region is a must for China as well. Their economy depends on it, and brokering peace there will only enhance China's status in the Gulf as well. And whether that gets accepted by the UN, the United Nations, or America is a totally separate issue. But I believe they'll try to push for peace. And ahead of the meeting, Putin also made a statement saying a multipolar world is taking shape, and initiatives put forward by President Xi are highly significant. Now you can say these two are just rubbing each other's back, right? After all, they even made pancakes together. That's truly a no limits partnership, right? But if you dig deeper, it shows the coordination of their economies to create a new financial order. And back in 2022, I think we could all recall the mainstream consensus that the Russian economy was about to collapse. But here we are, almost 18 months since the start of the conflict, and they are still standing. In fact, because of the Middle East crisis, Russian revenues are soaring thanks to higher oil prices. Russia's number one export is fossil fuels, oil and gas, so this shouldn't be a surprise at all. And check this out: according to the finance ministry, Russia's state oil and gas revenues rose by 15% in September to over $7.4 billion worth. And this is money coming from the taxes imposed on the oil companies. So it is essentially government revenues. And it is important to understand this because it connects directly to Russia-China partnership. The more money Russia earns from higher oil revenues, the more spare cash they have to invest, and it goes beyond just keeping the fight going. And what do we see? Russia's crude exports are slowly going up since the start of the year. They are pushing out more oil to the global markets, well above 3 million barrels a day. But here's the kicker: prices have been rising aggressively from July onwards till today after the OPEC Plus production cuts. Euro's oil has gone from $57 to over $80 a few days ago, and that is well above the G7 price cap of $60. And that means Russia will be enjoying a budget surplus instead of a trade deficit. They have excess money to invest in the global economy. And are they going to buy US treasuries? Are they going to buy euro bonds or dollar denominated assets? I really don't think so. The only destinations will be either yuan assets, gold, or investing with China to rebuild the world economy. So the Middle East conflict is actually giving Russia and China's plan a big tailwind to reshape the world. They now have more bandwidth to invest in BRICS and build up more Belt and Road projects. In fact, the United States sees this as such a big threat that they have begun sanctioning oil tanker owners. They are targeting transporters of Russian oil. If you carry Russian crude above the price cap of $60, then you are at risk. But here's the funny thing: China, on the other hand, is also benefiting from buying oil under Western sanctions. We know they have been buying discounted oil from Moscow and Iran, but now we have a number to pin on it. According to Reuters, China has reaped savings of nearly $10 billion buying oil from Russia and Iran. And you can bet they didn't use dollars in those transactions. They most likely settled completely in the Chinese yuan. So now we have Russia and China building up their trade surplus money they can use to invest in the BRI. And I think the Belt Road projects are going to be the future of trade, at least within the global south. Remember the hyped up corridor that the EU and America reviewed back during the G20 summit? The one that's supposed to connect Europe with the Middle East, extending all the way to India. Well, we know that plan is now underwater. The longer the conflict lasts, there's literally no physical way to build any trade corridor there. Plus, I really doubt that the Biden administration can raise any money to make it happen. They're now literally funding two conflicts which are pushing the US economy to the brink. So the road to reshaping the economic order is now open for Russia and China, and they're going to do it through the BRI. There's no competition because the West is stretched too thin and they are focused on two separate conflicts, one in Europe and the other in the Gulf. Putin sees the BRI as China's desire to cooperate with the world, and it's kind of obvious he's going to push this out as much as he can. And pay attention to this part because it highlights the key difference between the BRI and any other program from the West. In my opinion, the main advantage of this cooperation concept proposed by China is that within the framework of cooperation, no one imposes anything on others. No one imposes or forces anything on anyone. They only provide opportunities. And this is key because it goes beyond just financial help. America can always print billions of dollars to finance any project, but the big difference here is political, or in China's case, the absence of politics. To China, BRI projects are basically economic deals. It's a win win financial proposition, clear and simple. They can't be bothered to export their beliefs and values to other countries. It's all about trade and making money together. And this makes the BRI extremely attractive for countries that want to build up trade while being left alone. But something really fascinating happened just a few days ago. Remember America calling China's investments as debt traps? Well, there's now pushback on that narrative. During the recent IMF conference in Morocco, Saudi Arabia's finance minister defended China's Belt Road projects in front of the world. He reminded the world that China took big risks in places like Africa when people avoided the region. Instead of actually poking China, I think we should establish here that they did what they needed to do for their own interests, but also to actually help other nations. And I think this statement alone reminds us of quite a few things. The world is watching and they can see the value of the BRI. Over 150 countries have signed up with the Belt Road. If it is such a bad deal, such a horrific deal, why is the majority of the world supporting it? And understand that the advantage and the freedom of action now lies with China's BRI. And let's talk a bit about Russia and China's economic partnership because the stronger this grows, the less dependent either country will be on the West. And let's focus on Beijing for this one. What does China really want? And I think by now the answer should be quite obvious. China needs to secure tons of energy. And after witnessing the chaos in the Middle East, they know at least two things about relying too much on the Gulf. Firstly, there's a ton of tension in the region. It is still a powder keg which could spiral out of control. And even if the conflict ends tomorrow, the underlying issues have not been resolved. And secondly, they now know the big military presence the United States has in the Middle East. To support Israel, the United States has sent two carrier strike groups to the Middle East, which includes scrambling fighter jets as well. America's military presence in the Middle East, also known as US Central Command CENTCOM, is huge. They have military bases across the entire Gulf. They have a presence in countries including Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. But look closely at the map. You see that red dot, that red star? That's the Strait of Hormuz. It's a major shipping lane where oil exported out of the Middle East has no choice but to go through. It can be blockaded if push comes to shove. And if it happens, then China's oil supply from the Middle East is trapped. Beijing will be screwed. And this is one dependence that China has to diversify away from as well. So we can kind of expect Beijing to build up more infrastructure with Russia to channel more oil and gas to the mainland. At least they have the option to ramp up supply if anything happens with their energy supply overseas. China has been keeping quiet about building a second pipeline that goes through Mongolia to offtake Siberian gas. But with the recent events in the Middle East, it's just a matter of time before China ramps up their energy commitments from Russia. And for Russia, if they can secure the pipeline to China, that's 50 billion cubic meters of gas they can offload to Beijing. And this allows them to further reduce dependence on Europe if the unthinkable happens. Putin himself expects Russia-China trade to reach $200 billion by year's end. and this is a mutually beneficial arrangement. Russia needs stuff like semiconductors while China needs new markets to sell into. What if the West decides to decouple completely from China? I know that's laughable and highly unlikely, but they might do it even to their own detriment. And that's why we are seeing this sudden surge of trade that began exactly from Q2 2022 between Russia and China. And that was when the West unleashed their dollar sanctions on Russia and technology sanctions on China. Trade is booming to the point that China is exporting well over $10 billion worth of goods to Russia. And this is only going to continue, it's going to grow. In fact, Russia is selling more stuff to China than they are buying. And no matter how you analyze this, it is a win win in both economics and geopolitics. And I think at this point, Russia and China will go full steam ahead on their partnership. There's really nothing much left to distract them from building a new order. Even mainstream media like the Wall Street Journal admits that the conflict is tilting the global power balance in favor of Russia and China. And here's why. China's Wang Yi recently said Israel's actions goes beyond just self-defense, and this is coming at a time where the Arab world is showing concern over what's happening in the region. So Beijing, they are scoring points over in the Middle East, and that just paves the way for a Chinese-led peace plan if it ever comes to that. So I won't be surprised if China or even Russia gains more influence in the Gulf after the dust settles here. But let's shift our focus towards the United States because Biden just made a big statement. And I think the US economy is seriously moving towards a financial meltdown. According to President Biden, America, the most powerful nation, can financially support both Ukraine and Israel. And listen to this because it's truly wow. And I quote, "We are the United States of America for God's sake, the most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world, the history of the world. We can take care of both of this and still maintain our overall international defense." President Biden has chosen door number two. He has decided to double down and fund two simultaneous conflicts, one in Europe and the other in the Middle East. So America is trying to counter China, fight Russia, back Ukraine, and now support Israel all at the same time. This is the textbook definition of being stretched too thin. And here's the crazy follow-up. Janet Yellen has also agreed with President Biden, saying that the United States can afford to support both Ukraine and Israel. Well, of course, she can just issue more treasury bonds to raise the funds, right? So this is going to be an economic nightmare. More money will have to be borrowed into existence. Bond yields will continue to stay higher for longer, guys, and this inflation crisis will never end. So while the US is moving towards an economic crisis, China and Russia, they are reshaping the world behind the scenes. But let me know what you think in the comments below. What are China and Russia's next moves? And can the United States really fund two conflicts at the same time? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.